let's dive in with our next guest. We've got Gareth Soloway, Chief Market Strategist at Verified Investing. Gareth, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Let's start out broad-based before we get into Micron, because we're going to be looking at, kind of some technicals ahead of their earnings, and we've got other earnings in focus. But tell me first up, what's your take on this tech pullback that we're seeing?
Yeah, it looks like it's NVIDIA driven and semiconductor driven. So a lot of these stocks got so far ahead of where they should be on a technical basis, overbought RSIs. Pretty much every indicator out there was just extreme overbought. You even saw the momentum in NVIDIA prior to this pullback just became a FOMO trade where everyone was just rushing in regardless of the valuation. And so I think it just got a little too far ahead of itself. And now as we see a pullback, we look to see, is it a bigger pullback where we've put in a top, or is it just a pullback of consolidation before we make another move up?
Okay, so what is it actually? Is it consolidation or another leg higher? Let's talk Micron. In focus this week, they've got earnings coming up. Micron making some small gains today. What are you looking at when it comes to the technicals?
Yeah, so there's a huge trend line we tagged last week on Micron going back to 2016, and it's a upsloping trend line. Epic resistance. In fact, when we made the high in 2021, this was the high pivot on the trend line that caused the big pullback then. And now we've run all the way up back and tagged it again. In addition, we got a daily topping tail. That's a bearish reversal signal, and also a weekly topping tail on the chart right off of this trend line. So based on these factors, you have to think that this is the beginning of a bigger pullback. And going back to what you mentioned prior, I'm in the camp that we're closer to a major pullback in the semis and in the markets than another leg up.
Okay. I could see that overall in the market because of where we are. You're the technical guy. I'll leave the technicals to you. Okay, before another leg up, but go ahead. Sorry, you want to add something, Gareth?
Yeah, I was just going to say too, and investors, I think, you've got this VIX where it's the volatility index that's gotten so low. No one's accounting for any of the bigger risks out there, whether it's the dollar yen and the potential intervention in the currency markets by Japan, or if it's anything with China and Taiwan, or even the elections coming up. And so I think as you get closer to those elections and these other factors, with these stocks starting to kind of get fair valued, if you will, or even a little bit overvalued, it makes sense that some investors closer to the elections may want to take a little bit of money off the table and kind of go back to cash just to wait and see.
All right, that makes sense. All right, let's pivot outside of tech and look at another earnings report that we have coming up. You'll look at the technicals. So Nike's set to report its quarterly numbers this week. It's kind of like the close of the earnings season, basically, when Nike comes up. Now, I pay attention to the numbers to see how the consumer is doing. Nike had some challenges due to inventory, but what are you looking at when it comes to the technicals for Nike?
So the technicals themselves on Nike are not too bad here. We are coming off of a key support at $90. So I think your downside risk on this trade is $90. Your upside's actually about $107 to $108. So there's a little favoring of upside in this chart. But the one thing I would just mention is if price does break 90, that's kind of that trap door where you could see a bigger pullback to the downside. I think everyone is going to be watching the comments on China. How's the China economy? We know that was one of the problem areas for Nike in the prior quarter that had their hardships. So I think at this point, everyone's looking to China. Is there any sort of rebound in that conference call when they report earnings? And that'll be the key for whether price attacks $90 to the downside, potentially breaking, or can run up to that 107 to 108 level.
All right, another one that you're watching that is next up. It's out tomorrow. FedEx reports earnings this Tuesday. What do the technicals look like to you?
Yeah, technicals on this one do not look too good, to be honest. We have an upsloping channel. Upsloping channels tend to probability-wise break to the downside. We're just hovering above support, which is right around 245. So I would expect on this either on earnings or just after earnings for a breakdown on FedEx, and look for a leg down potentially as low as about 220 before it finds decent support. So a little bearish on the chart on FedEx here.
A little bearish on the chart for FedEx. All right, that's one to watch. The stock is higher at the moment ahead of its earnings. We'll see what happens tomorrow. But let's broaden out past equities. I want to talk to you and hear your perspective, Gareth. We've seen just this downdraft hit Bitcoin recently. I mean, it really found a lot of favor from the beginning of the year until recently. It's really been flagging, and it fell to this 60,000 level today. Just continuing this downdraft that we've seen recently, down more than 6% today. What do the trends tell you? What do the technicals tell you about it?
Yeah, so there was a key level around the 60 to 61,000 level, and we're kind of just bobbing up against that right now. But again, this is one of those scenarios you may see a little bit of a bounce, but we've broken a bigger uptrend in the chart. And so ultimately what I would expect is further downside in the coming weeks and months, probably to 50 to 49,000. That's the high of the spot ETF approval when it had that big pop before it corrected 20%. So it should be technical support on the way down. In addition, just notice how even when the tech stocks like NVIDIA were running higher, Bitcoin was not catching a big bid. That was kind of a precursor or signal that it was going to have some weakness. And then as soon as NVIDIA's turned lower here, and it's been kind of a little bit more of a risk-off market, Bitcoin started to fall much harder. So again, investors in Bitcoin have to understand that it is still a risk asset. And in fact, it's even a little riskier than something like an NVIDIA, and it tends to lead to the downside. So I would generally say small bounce in this area is possible, but look for more downside in the coming weeks.
To your point, Gareth, literally as we were talking, it fell below 60,000. So it's still close to 60,000, kind of kissing it right now, 59,990. So, I mean, literally as we were talking, it started drifting further. Gareth, thank you. Great insight on Bitcoin and then some of the earnings we have coming up from Micron to Nike to FedEx. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you.
That was Gareth Soloway, Chief Market Strategist at Verified Investing.